We're going to go to item 15, which is a revision to the innovation policy. First reading, Stephen Tong and Carrie Lowe, welcome.
This is the CM slide. Without even doing it. This is 15. The actual allocation. Just the actual allocation. And this other is
As Jack said, we run very cost efficiently. Stephen Tong, Director of Innovation and Risk. And before I begin, I'd just like to introduce my team. To my left is Carrie Lowe, and she's a portfolio manager on the innovation side. She's been with CalSTRS since 2009. Her previous experience has been private sector with a hedge fund, as well as investment banking. And then if I could have Glenn stand up, please. And my other person on the team is Glenn Blasé. He's been with CalSTRS for how many years now, Glenn?
Since 2005.
Okay, but he comes to CalSTRS with previous experience at BGI and has over 15 years of experience in public equities. So that's the team. Today, you have before you an agenda item, and it's consideration of modifying the policies for innovation portfolio. Policies were created in March of 2009. And so you can see 4 years has elapsed, and the last revision was actually back in September where we added the ESG policy. So we think that now there's, after 4 years, there's some slight revisions that need to take place. So before we get into the details, I'd just like to briefly go over the objectives for the innovation program. It's very simple, is to find strategies to help diversify the total portfolio. While the statement is simple, the actual execution is very difficult, and we'll get into some details later on. So with that, there's other things too that we think are beneficial for the program, and that's transfer of knowledge. So we have relationships with many managers that are considered industry experts, and what we like is that we're able to dialogue with them and to ask them questions about their views on the market. And we think that this information could be helpful as we think about our own internal investment process. As an example, one of our managers, we started dialoguing with them, and they started providing us scenario analysis on a quarterly basis. So what we've done is that in the scenario analysis, they have essentially a bear case, a base case, and a bull case, and they assign probabilities across these various scenarios. And so as we take a look at these scenarios, we could get an idea of what the impact would be across our various asset classes, as well as the total portfolio. So to the effect, for example, if we take one of the cases and we have a high conviction behind it, we can look across our portfolio and see where it would have positive results as well as negative results. So to the respect that we're uncomfortable with the risk, we can take appropriate actions such as hedging out that risk. So with that, why don't we get into some of the process, and Carrie will talk briefly about the process.
So Chris often refers to us as a test lab, and we have a wide scope of opportunities to research. So we've developed a very research-based process. We get a lot of information from academia, our peers, partners, advisors, our own internal research. And we have to take a lot of information and filter that down to identify the most compelling strategies to diversify our portfolio. So we often start with quantitative analysis, looking at how a strategy's correlation to equity and fixed income is, how it performs during those periods of volatility and drawdowns in the broader markets. And we also couple that with qualitative analysis from our discussions with managers about how they actually execute the strategy. And when we find an opportunity that seems compelling, we'll present a case paper and vet it out with our Innovation Advisory Committee as well as advisors. And this is a very iterative process. Out of that has come 3 strategies funded to date. You'll see in blue at the bottom left-hand side. And once we've identified those strategies, we need to then identify the managers that will best implement that strategy. And again, we go through quantitative and qualitative analysis, vetting that with our IAC and the advisors. And once this pool of managers is determined, we go up to the upper right corner and construct a portfolio and have a regular dialogue with these managers about how they're positioned, what types of idiosyncratic or unique opportunities they're finding, and what their market views are to share with the TAC committee. And Stephen will go into more about other strategies that we're looking at and the pacing of those investments.
I'd just like to add to Carrie's comment, the Innovation Advisory Committee is a very important part of the process. And the committee consists of not only members from our own unit, but also across the entire portfolio or across various asset classes. So it consists of the chief investment officer and 2 other asset classes. And this is just really for us to have sort of a check and balance in place. So we want to be able to vet it out with the internal staff and have them really take a look at our case paper before we actually consider investing or incubating in a strategy. So what you have here on this slide is that it's really our plan going out for the next 5 or 6 years or so. So where we are today is that the Innovation Advisory Committee has reviewed and approved approximately $1.3 billion. We've actually invested a total of $860 million to date. And so and if I could, how we kind of think about the strategies, we really break it down into 3 different buckets. So the first bucket, if you will, I would call sort of alternative to an existing asset class. So what does that mean? As an example, if you think about, let's say, global equities as an example, you may have read in the financial press something about alternative equity betas. So what we're looking at is what's called 2 different strategies. One is called low volatility, and the second one is called cover calls. And what the Innovation Advisory Committee has approved is $150 million to really incubate in these 2 different strategies. The second sort of category that we look at is what I would call a sub-asset class. So a perfect example is that if you look at the inflation-sensitive asset class, what you have approved is 2 different strategies. So one is global tips and the other is infrastructure. So what we're looking at is potentially a 3rd strategy that could be added, and so that's commodities. And so the committee, we brought that, as you're aware, we brought that for you and through many presentations, but we finally came to the decision that we would incubate $150 million. We already funded 1 manager, and we'll be funding a couple more. And then lastly is another bucket. The last bucket is and an example would be global macro, the risk-based strategies, and those are examples of strategies that might fall into the absolute return asset classes. So that's kind of, if you will, how we kind of think about these strategies and how we're bucketing it. And so what I wanted to draw your attention to is sort of the current limit. If you see here, this is where our policy stands today, and this is one of the reasons why we're bringing the policy to your attention. So right now, within the policies, there's a limit of $2 billion, a hard limit, or a maximum of 1.5% of fund. Obviously, 1.5% of fund today would be over the $2 billion mark. But as you can see, as we get out into 2015, just given the pacing that we have in place and the strategies that we're looking at, we'll have to breach that limit. So with that, Carrie is going to now get into the actual policy revisions that we're asking you to review.
Before we go, Mr. Rosenstiel?
Yeah, just a clarification so I
Sure.
understand the policy. So innovation isn't an asset class. It crosses over asset classes. Is that, I mean, some of it is in certain asset classes, some of it is elsewhere, but in aggregate over all of the asset classes, we have a policy limit of 1.5% of the total portfolio?
You're absolutely right. We are not an asset class as you would think about with real estate, private equity, et cetera. But we have to have a home in the portfolio somewhere. And so we're places, if you go to the absolute return asset class, we're actually placed in there right now.
Okay.
So Stephen's portfolio, if you think about the hierarchy, Stephen's portfolio sits in absolute return. That asset class, the target for that is 0.
Right.
The range is 0 to 3%. So he's part of that range. The home loan program is in there too, along with the currency managers. As we go forward, if Stephen does a strategy and he thinks it's worthwhile to have what we consider graduate, I know we're getting rid of that word, but to move into another portfolio, we would then move it to an asset class. So let's pick on hedge funds. If we decide that that's worthwhile of a full multi-billion-dollar allocation, that would be part of your asset allocation discussion of, do you actually want to allocate money to absolute return? Because that's where hedge funds would fall. But Stephen's also looking at a low volatility. If we think that's worthwhile, that would be a traditional equity strategy and it would fall under David Murphy's portfolio.
Okay, thank you.
So given that we're approaching this limit potentially in the next couple of years, we're requesting a 1% increase in this allocation, so it'd be approximately $1.7 billion. It would allow us to approximately double the number of strategies that we're looking at and not have to reduce our existing investments prematurely or forgo those opportunities that make it through our research process. We're also requesting an increase in the delegation of authority to give us better negotiating power with managers and to negotiate managed accounts. Managed accounts are particularly helpful in reducing some of the risk relating to liquidity and transparency and control. And so with these proposals, it will help us to put our research ideas to work with a little bit less risk and less cost as well. So at this time, we will open it up to questions.
Can you explain why a percentage of the overall portfolio is a better option than just a hard number? Because if it's 1.5% of the portfolio as it goes up, obviously the allocation will go up. If the portfolio goes down, the allocation would go down. But if there was a hard number, why the percentage as opposed to the specific dollar amount?
Either way, the percent or the dollar amount is relatively small compared to the rest of the portfolio, so it's still incubation phase. But with the $2 billion hard cap, we easily can hit that, and it's just inconsistent with the percentage that we have limited for our strategies, such as global macro can only be up to 0.5%. We'll retain that. But if we have a hard dollar cap, then sometimes those can come into conflict.
It also fits with the internal auditors, as they've been coming through and looking at different investment policies, have been recommending we move everything to percentages of the portfolio rather than hard dollar limits. That's also in keeping with that theme throughout the other policies.
Thank you. Any other questions? Mr. Rosensteel?
Thank you. So I'm trying to understand it. So we're sort of like the innovation area is sort of a research group within the investments to identify strategies that, I think the description is, that will either enhance return or reduce risk. And I guess my question is, what why do we need to do our own independent research on that? Aren't we sort of reinventing the wheel? I mean, there are all of these strategies that people have been pursuing for a long time, and I'm trying to understand how our relatively modest, actually, allocation to this and an attempt to measure results over, I think, what is a 3-year period. Why it almost seems like a step we don't have to take, that we should identify a risk or return challenge we want to address, and there must be lots of attempts that have been made to that. So I'm trying to understand why we're uniquely doing that on our own, if you understand the question.
Stephen, let me take a stab at it, and then you try and answer it. Part of the mandate in my job description from you is to be innovative. You're right, we get a lot of really interesting, wild investment ideas, and they all work. How amazing. And as I said, time period matters, and boy, do we know that. So part of the motivation to creating the innovation group was the recognition that we need to vet the sales pitch and really see, does it really work? And does it work in our environment? It's one thing for Harvard and Yale or Stanford to prove it works as an investment management company, but what's it like for us when we have RFPs and state contracts and at our size? And so a big part of Stephen's effort, and as we found, is it's a great story, but as we always discuss, the challenges in the implementation. And as we implemented hedge funds, and you've got to sign certain agreements, and do those vet, will they pass our legal standards versus somebody else's? So we've learned some very valuable lessons about what's the real cost to do some of these strategies. Stephen's group was able to look, I'll pick on one that we chose not to do, was life settlements. We had a lot of pressure from legislators and other groups to do life settlement investments. He was able to really tear open the cover and get into the details on that. As you know, we've looked at microfinance, so we've looked at things where the asset classes, Paul, they're so focused on executing their area. They try and do research in their area, but there was nothing for things that fell between the walls of the asset classes, like a microfinance or a life settlement. I just sent Stephen, you're going to laugh, but I sent Stephen yesterday a lead that I wanted to research on honey bees and honey farms. It's a legitimate area, but it's agriculture. Stephen's walked, I always like to tease him. He put his boots on and he walked a walnut grove. Some people throw that vineyards. Some people throw that in agriculture. Some people throw that in timber. Some people throw that in real estate. They can see, and then they can come back and say, is that viable at our size? And will that move the needle? So you're right that in some cases we could come to you and say we either should or shouldn't. What they're testing is specific strategies, and 3 years is going to be tough. We acknowledge that. 3 years is going to be tough for us to come back and say we firmly believe in this, or we're still not sure. But we wanted to give ourselves a hard time frame of kind of like fish or cut bait. You're either going to do this or move off and stop playing with something and looking at something. And they're trying to find the discipline, and you're picking up on it, I think, to find something that enhances our return and reduces our risk. Yeah, I want that. I would have thought somebody would have showed, they would have wanted to sell that to us before by now. And so we've seen it all, but now their job is to really, the best way I can describe it, I guess, is to test drive it from our perspective. And does it really work?
Oh, I'm sorry, go ahead, Steve. And that's a great answer.
Oh, okay. I'll just,
Stephen, answer. You did the better.
no, I'll just add on. Chris had very good comments. I think the key word for me when I heard Chris speak is really independent research. If you kind of think about it in your own situation, if you ask somebody to come to you and tell me about this product, the person that's selling the product is going to probably tell you all the good things about it, and maybe a little bit, well, what can go wrong. But this is just our way to really understand the product. What are the advantages and what are the disadvantages? Do we really truly understand the risk? And the second comment I'd like to add is that in the traditional, if you look in the traditional space or traditional assets, they have a long history. So, for example, with equities, it goes back well over 100 years. You get into some of the alternative space, and I'll just throw out hedge funds as an example. The history only goes back 2 decades. So in those type of situations, we want to be more cautious. We don't want to go in full board and add a lot of money until we really understand what is the value of the strategy, and do we really understand what are the advantages as well as the disadvantages if we were to include it in the portfolio in a significant amount.
And so if I could just ask one more follow-up question, and so out of the then limitless ideas that you can investigate, how do you decide what to look at, and does that I'm sure Chris is involved with that, but is there sort of an overall process by which the senior portfolio managers in the investment division say, gee, if we could address this problem because we've got risk here or volatility here? I mean, I'm just trying to understand how that process works so that it's targeted and effective.
Tell me your process, Steve.
Okay. Yeah, this is getting sort of the details now, but I'll try to stay just very high level so you kind of get a feeling of what we're trying to accomplish and how we really isolate opportunities that we really want to pursue. So it's a very good question. We get pitched a lot of different opportunities, and if you can imagine, just you saw the org chart early on, we have so much, and it's just like a funnel. Everything kind of comes down to here. So we need a process to figure out what's going to come through that funnel first. And so this is a question that we thought about, and we don't have a perfect answer, but so what we're trying to do is really systematize the process. So what we're doing right now is that we're actually developing a plan. And so we reached out to about 5 of our important partners that really have a really good understanding of the market. And so the first question that we're asking is, what is the opportunity set that we should consider as a public pension plan? So that's the first question that we're asking. The next thing that we'll do is that we'll draw a liquidity screen. So you may have an interesting idea, but given our size, we may not be able to invest enough money behind it. So we want to remove those. We want to remove those opportunities. So hopefully we'll take a list of, let's say, 25 different opportunities. Now we'll narrow it down to, let's say, 10, hopefully. And so once we come down with the opportunity sets that's appropriate for, let's say, CalSTRS or a pension fund our size, then the next thing we'll do is that we want to create an optimal allocation. So that's a conversation this is the process that we're going through right now. And so we're working with some of our external managers, and we're asking them to help us kind of think about that.
Stephen, can I jump in?
Sure.
And I think part of your question, Paul, is how do you order the research? There's so much to study. Stephen created an innovation advisory council, which Michelle and I are part of, along with some other people. The first thing that makes it through is, does it reduce our risk and enhance our return? Well, that would be the magic box, and there aren't many of those. So the next is, does it reduce our risk? And that gets a priority. Then does it enhance our return, which most of the things people try and show us theoretically enhance our return. That kind of gives him at least a line, and then he applies the liquidity screen, like the honey and bees may not be a big enough opportunity set, so that's at the back of the list. And we meet periodically to help him reprioritize, given the small resource staff, of what should they be studying and looking at, so that they're not walking in orchards when we want them looking at a much bigger opportunity set. But that's how we order the research. The part of the big value is we get hit with so many ideas. Stephen now has at least a research library where we have a file so that we can take an idea like honeybees or life settlements, and we'll get hit with it again in about 3 years. Catastrophe bonds. I mean, it's amazing the stuff they're coming up with. Stephen has a file on that. The research I get or anybody gets, we can just start plunking in there. Therefore, we have our own database of stuff to go back and look at. Okay, what is the story in catastrophe bonds? Who's in it, and who's done some interesting work in that area?
One thing that's been really helpful is really on the risk side, as we sort of move forward, we talked about earlier, is on sort of this factor-based approach as opposed to allocating by asset classes. And what that framework has really helped us do is to really decompose either a strategy or an asset class to really help us understand what's driving returns. So as new opportunities kind of come to us, we'll decompose it just on a very high level. And if it has similar characteristics as things that we currently own, then we would probably just set that aside and say, well, this is something in a different name, but let's just kind of set it aside now because we have exposure to that opportunity or those driving factors.
Mr. McGuire?
All right, thank you. I'd like to just comment from another board member's perspective, because I sort of observed the work of this group since its inception, and it's been a long process. I'm sure they feel it's been longer than it has been for myself as an observer. And I think the first program that you recommended was infrastructure, wasn't it? I think.
Global
Infrastructure
macro,
investments.
wasn't it?
Pardon me? Global macro. I couldn't remember which one was first, but anyway, there's really only 3 programs right now that are being tested and measured, but each one of them was somewhat subject to very serious scrutiny by this board. This board's conservative. We've only put our toe in the water in these things. We should, I think, in short order, start to have some feedback and evaluation and some performance metrics to evaluate the success and the usefulness of these strategies. And then the next step is going to be decisions on expanding them, bringing more resources, to this group and to some of the strategies that they've tested and have validated for us. But it's been a long process. It's been rather painful in some respects, but I think it's been worthwhile so far. We're making progress, and I'm looking forward to some of the reports down the road and some additional recommendations. I thought that plan that you've been laying out in the earlier slides and so on, looks very exciting, and I look forward to it. So,
Any other questions or comments? Okay, seeing none, so this was a first reading, so you'll bring back these changes in February for adoption? Okay, thank you very much. Item number 16. Pension 2 investment report.
We'll bring up Ed, and then I want to introduce Helena, who you saw before. Sure, go ahead and sit over there. And then Candace. Candace, as she was introduced to you, is our newest portfolio manager in global equity. And I'm pleased to say we pulled her. She has an experience in private wealth. Very extensive experience in the private wealth management field, so it's going to really help her on working on the Pension 2 assets with us. And we were able to pull her away from Santa Barbara, so that speaks highly to us. She lived in Sacramento before, so it's, but yeah, to get her out of Santa Barbara to come to us, hot dog. You can question her judgment later. I'm sure in the middle of the winter when it's 70 on the beach there. But, since you changed the division of duties and clarified and adopted an investment policy, we'll now bring to you reports on the Pension 2 assets. This is just our first preliminary report. We really pulled some stuff out of Ed's presentation yesterday, right, the benefits and services, and put it in here. Going forward, what we'd like to do is incorporate it very similar to what we do with the external manager report, the color coding. But we want to be open to whatever you want to see, since this is a new program from the investment committee perspective. And again, the administration and the investment options are really pretty tightly linked, as you're going to see in here. And so even though they're divided between Ed and I, you'll get kind of the both of us on some of these things, because you can't really just look at the investment options in isolation sometimes. So.
Yeah, pretty much it's just,
Ed, before you start.
Before you start, can you guys just explain again, because I know you did this for me earlier, but maybe for the board, just explain your role and Chris's role with the Pension 2 piece,
sure.
so that people understand.
My role is that the program, Pension 2, the administration of the program is housed in Defined Contribution Solutions, which is under my responsibility. So issues such as issuing the RFP, leading the evaluation of the different vendors, working with coordinating the transition to a record keeper. If there's any issues around from participants about the program, all the administration of the program is under my responsibility. As far as the investment options themselves, that's Chris's responsibility. And there's a Pension 2 advisory committee which both Candace and Helena are on, as well as some of the defined contribution solution staff. But that's they're making recommendations to Chris about investment options, glide paths, that kind of thing, and Chris makes those decisions.
So it's dangerous. It just popped in my head. It's a word picture. Might not be a perfect analogy, but it's Ed's job to build and run the restaurant. We come traipsing in and we help pick the menu, and we change what's a la carte, because what you got is a big long a la carte list and some entrees, because we want to give the people enough choices, but the people who don't want choices can just say, I want, combination plate A. And so that's our job, to work with them and pick that side of it.
So, really is here, as Chris said, a lot of the information that's in here was in some of the information that was provided yesterday, and as Chris said, maybe in future years it may be displayed somewhat differently, different information, but we really pretty much wanted to open it up if you had any questions around the material. On pages 347 and 348, there's sort of the returns on the core funds, and just sort of explain what the core funds are all mutual funds. They have low management fees, there's no commissions. To the extent there's any revenue sharing associated with those funds, those are sort of credited back to the specific participants in those funds, so that they're getting the benefit of that revenue sharing. The easy choice portfolios are risk and target date portfolios that each have a glide path that reflect different target dates as well as levels of risk. And this shows you the returns on those, but those consist of a subset of the core funds that we offer. And then the pension 2 fund, we are showing that, but we also have a brokerage account where we have thousands of different mutual funds that people can choose from if they want to go that route. But the idea of the easy choice portfolio is they tell us when they want to, what target date they want, what their risk profile is. Then those funds get allocated in accordance with the particular glide path, and it works as asset allocation. And then as they approach those target dates, then that gets reallocated once a year. And then the appendix sort of shows some of the information around the different funds and how they compare to the benchmark over different periods of time. So I don't know if Helene, if you want to add anything in terms of any particular things you want to highlight for the committee?
The only thing that I'd add is, going forward, as Chris mentioned, we're going to be doing this semi-annually, and it's going to be formatted differently. It'll be formatted the same way that we do the semi-annual investment manager report for consistency purposes. So you'll see the green and the red and the arrows, and hopefully that'll help you out. And if there's any other additional information that you'd like in that report as well, of course, we'd be happy to include that.
Yeah, we can include such things as anything we've added to the watch list, which we will post on the website, but in case, to provide you the ongoing information about any particular funds we're keeping an eye on or making any changes to.
Any questions, comments?
Short added comment. Pension 2 has had an investment consultant helping them, or a general consultant. What Ed and I worked out is that once you select your new general consultant, we're going to expand their duties to include the Pension 2 assets, so then you'll have that person who can opine. And so if they disagree with one of our ratings on a fund or one of our decisions, they're your consultant to oversight and to watch what we do. And the other thing, I want to tread lightly on this. Given the comments earlier today, you don't see the asset allocation here. It was in the benefit and services report, but given the comments earlier from the public in the board meeting, it kind of shows the linkage between the menu of options and then the record keeper. The most popular option, almost 25% of the assets, are in that TIAA traditional account. That's an account that has a $1 NAV, so like a money market fund, but is paying, 3.35%. So it's very popular because it's a nice rate on a very liquid account. But obviously TIAA is only going to offer that to people that it provides the record keeping to. So it's an interesting issue. I think your RFP is out on the street, right?
It is.
So,
we're in no contact period.
okay, so so the RFP for record keeping is out on the street. Ed's group will run that. We'll provide comments and just be aware. But who you pick on your record keeper can end up making you change your options just so you're aware. But so we're definitely always joined at the hip on this. It's a dual structure just due to the nature of the DC assets, defined contribution assets. Sorry.
Dana?
So Chris, company ABC is our record keeper. Because they're their record keeper, our record keeper, they give us access to their funds. We have a bunch of people start investing money in those funds. We go through an RFP process and we choose company XYZ. Say we have 5,000 people that are still participating or were participating in ABC, then all those funds go away? They have to roll their funds over to XYZ? Or?
Yeah, no, that's where we'll end up working together. Everybody that's a state worker just went through that because the Savings Plus program changed from one record keeper over to another. The biggest thing people notice, they get a new website that they have to interface through. But yeah, you end up having to look at how do you map people, how do you guide people. Your hope that you're able to offer the identical set of menu options with the new record keeper you had with the other. Sometimes, like as you can see, a lot of these names are just third-party funds that any record keeper could give us access to. The unique ones the record keeper offers are ones you have to work on. Ed, go ahead.
Yeah, a couple of things. One, that you need to be aware of is that generally speaking, we're making all the choices around the funds that are offered, and one of the things that we always look at is to make sure that the record keeper has relationships with all the families that we want to deal with. With respect to a particular family of funds that may coincide with the record keeper, the implications of that will vary, and we really probably shouldn't go any farther than that because of where we are in the process. It's something that we are aware of and may or may not have an impact. There are ways that it can be managed. So I don't want anyone to come away with that there's a specific implication of if there's a change.
Thank you, I appreciate that, because that's probably where I was gonna go.
Ms. Hedrick?
I guess I just wanted to reiterate and clarify in my mind what you just said, Ed, because my understanding is this, I always forget what your guys are called, the advisory committee. It's the advisory committee, correct?
Yes.
That decides the funds that are gonna be.
It makes a recommendation to Chris about the funds. Chris makes
Right,
the
well,
ultimate
Chris makes a
decision.
decision,
Right.
but there's a committee.
Yes.
That comes together and
Yes.
says, here are the 22, the 15, and the 7, and then gives it to Chris, and then Chris makes the recommendation, right? Is that
Makes
how
a
it works?
decision.
Makes the decision,
Yes.
okay,
It's delegated decision.
okay.
Yes.
So, that's all I just wanted to clarify.
Yeah, very similar to what you've done with hiring, firing U.S. or non-U.S. equity managers. We're selecting managers. The difference here is we're just offering them as an option. The participants have to choose what they want to put their money.
Okay, seeing no other questions, thank you very much. Item 11, we're going back to item 11, which is the Corporate Governance Engagement Plan open session. We had a report in closed session, so we're just, if there are additional questions that committee members may have, let us know. Otherwise, other questions? Okay. And you're, stay where you are.
Off the hook.
Okay, item 14, Real Estate Emerging Management Manager Implementation Plan. Mike DeRay.
Good afternoon. Mike DeRay, Director of Real Estate. Greg Nyland to my left, Portfolio Manager in Real Estate, and has been assisting in the emerging manager work we've been doing over the last couple of years. And Nick Rittenhouse with Townsend is essentially the man behind the curtain at Townsend that puts together all the numbers for their semi-annual reports. And so he's sitting in for Townsend today and also has done some work with us on gathering information for this strategy. We're not going to go through the whole presentation in the interest of time, but what we are going to say is that in setting this over the year, that we had some major findings that came from looking into it and taking an industry a top-down view of the emerging manager universe. Some of the key findings were essentially there's no right way to get this done. And we've looked at other programs, we've looked at other pension funds, and there's just not a one way to get it done correctly. We've had a lot of success in investing with emerging managers. We've had significant success in investing with managers of diversity, but we can improve that. I'm not going to go through all the slides, but we're going to highlight a couple of things. The major challenges in the Emerging Manager Program was essentially we wanted to increase the diversity. The biggest challenge in that is the industry doesn't have a lot of diversity to begin with. Economies of scale is always an issue for a large pension fund such as ourselves. We want to work with other managers that have economies of scale, just both because of their experience in the marketplace and also because of the cost effectiveness of working with large organizations in the real estate industry. The other major challenge to work with emerging managers is staff oversight. Whether we work with a small manager or a large manager takes a certain amount of time. Smaller managers, because they're less experienced, take more time typically. But also if you have a number of small managers to cover a portfolio, say you use 3 apartment managers across the country as opposed to 1, you just multiply your efforts by 3. Track record is what I say in the paper is the catch-22. The emerging managers in the marketplace, they want to work with pension funds such as ourselves. They don't have the track record, and they ask, well, how can I build a track record if no one will give me capital to build the track record? And that's the biggest challenge both for the staff and the consultants that review these. Our independent fiduciaries is we want to look at a long track record before we invest, and they have a trouble getting a long track record with institutional capital. Greg will speak to our portfolio.
As we define emerging managers, it's $1 billion of assets under management or less. It's kind of the general term that's used by most funds. And out of that, out of our $22 billion investment portfolio in real estate, about 36% you can see is with emerging managers today. Then another portion of that segment of that is with diverse managers. That 12%, some of them have emerged, so they have $1 billion in assets or greater. And when you compare that back to those that are emerging and diverse, it's about 6% of our portfolio is with that category.
Real quickly, I'm going to talk about structure. And the reason I want to talk about structure is because the advantage that we have, the size of our fund and the experience of our staff, we can marry certain structures to get both the advantage of cost savings and also be nimble in the marketplace. The basic structure for our investments in core real estate is these separate account managers. The capital that goes into us, we have 100% ownership typically in these investments, and we have full control over the asset decisions to buy, to sell the assets. We don't make day-to-day decisions on tenant mix and things like that, but we have control of the asset sale, control of the leverage. Fee structure is low. This is predominantly core assets. Emerging managers do not go into this space because they cannot develop the economies of scale. Commingled funds is the area where emerging managers mostly try to build a portfolio and invest. These are opportunity funds typically. They're usually higher risk investments. They usually have higher fees. Our ownership percentages is usually between 2 and 25%. We're a limited partner. We only make the decision to go into the partnership. We may sit on the advisory board, but we don't have a lot of decision making. So this is a typical way that most funds look for and invest with emerging managers, and we have done this as well. The joint venture structure is the structure that we most prefer to invest with emerging managers, and it's actually the best way that we think to invest, period, for real estate. Our fundamental belief in investment in real estate, it's a local operating business, and you invest with sharpshooters, if you will. So through a joint venture structure, we can still have the separate account manager that oversees the strategy, but also find those local operating partners that have expertise in a specific market. So we can marry a joint venture operating partner, which is probably an emerging manager, and at some point that operating partner might emerge to our direct partner. But coming in, they usually have oversight from an existing separate account manager, and then we invest in the assets. We ask for co-investment from the operating partner to the extent there's risk. So we have alignment of interest and they have capital at risk. Our control is medium to high, depending on the negotiation. We usually always control the sale decision and the purchase decision, the leverage issues, and we also usually have a buy sale that we can, buy the partner out if things aren't working out. That control is key to us. So quickly, the pros and cons. We like that control of the joint venture strategy. It's the portion of the businesses work best for us. And from the cons, it's a lot of staff time, to build these joint ventures up with a number of different operating partners. So we still want fairly large investments, but we also are able to reach down with smaller partners. When you look at the structure of our emerging manager holdings in our current portfolio, 57% is through joint ventures of the emerging managers. 41% are funds, and that wasn't because we're trying to find funds with emerging managers. It just so happened that a number of the funds that we invested with, they have assets under management that's less than $1 billion, so they are by definition an emerging manager. And the 2% slice there is the fund of funds that was really directed towards us trying to invest with emerging managers in the past. It's important to note we haven't made an emerging a fund of fund investment since, I believe, 1998. I'm sorry, 2008.
2006.
2006, okay.
These two slides are courtesy of Credit Suisse, whose emerging manager conference I attended just a few weeks ago. There's just a couple things that we want to highlight. The total funds in the market are somewhere between 800 and 900, depending on who's doing the counting. Townsend is one of the sources for that information. The chart on the left is the local operator, 42% of the fund history for emerging managers, and we're talking about the emerging manager universe being approximately 400 emerging managers. Local operators comprise a significant portion of that. As Mike said, we like the local aspect of that. The other point on this chart that's important to take away is the women and minority businesses represent 18% of the 400 emerging managers. So a small portion is, women and minority businesses are still underrepresented. There's just not a lot of them. I go to a lot of the emerging manager conferences, and while they're emerging managers, it's not a particularly diverse group. The next slide is kind of the success ratio. I won't go into this. These are busy slides. About 35% of women and minority businesses funds actually make it to a close. That means the success rate's 35%, the failure rate's 65%. Townsend's information is...
Yeah, just an additional point there of all the aggregate funds in the universe, there's about a 57% rate for them to actually hit that initial close.
So the smaller funds, part of it is not because they're smaller funds, they're first-time funds, they just have a much more difficult time raising capital. And we can go through that. Yeah. This quickly is the fund-to-fund model. CalSTRS and other investors will invest where the top line, we'll put in 150 million into a fund-to-fund manager who's raising a fund in the $300 to $750 million range. They will in turn invest with discrete emerging manager investments. They'll make investments from $25 to $100 million. Within those groups is where the real estate is. So if you could see, we could draw that chart a little farther and you can show individual discrete real estate investments within each one of those funds.
Before you leave that, just a comment from the back row. If you recall from the CEM presentation, fund of funds are the most expensive management structure, which we all know. You'll hear us often refer to it as FOF, fund of funds. I refer to that to the staff all the time as fees on fees, because you're paying a layer of fees at that 300 to 750 million range, and you're paying a layer of fees at the bottom. So it makes it doubly harder, but it is a way to reach the managers.
Some of the pros and cons of the fund-to-fund structure is that we'll reach a wider pool. Staff cannot meet with all 400 of those emerging managers, so the fund-to-fund managers can do that. It helps us stretch staff resources are the biggest gains for us. As Chris mentioned, one of the biggest challenges it's a heavy fee load. And then the control issues are what Mike mentioned on general funds that go with fund of funds as well. One of the newer models is coming out, and one that we applaud because we think it mirrors what we do a lot, is the fund of joint ventures, where the fund manager will partner with a local operator, again, at a much more granular level, maybe at an individual real estate transaction level. And that is something that we think is going to be great for us, and will open up even more and smaller managers for us to have access to. Again, the cons are the fees, and the skill of the fund of joint venture managers is not only they have to have expertise in running a fund, they really have to understand individual real estate investments. So we take careful look at them when assessing their skills on that. Addressing the challenges, as Mike mentioned at the outset, there's the four major challenges. As far as addressing increasing diversity, we believe we'll use all aspects that we've discussed, using the joint ventures, the programmatic joint ventures that we employ, the fund of funds, the funds of joint ventures. As far as addressing the economy of scales, again, we believe that the fund of funds can get us to smaller managers than we would be able to do on our own. As far as staff oversight is concerned, it's a delicate balance, as we pointed out in our report. And as this is a labor-intensive business, it takes a lot to manage smaller managers, and we need to have a discussion about staffing with our senior management. As far as the track record, Mike mentioned that again at the outset. It's hard for someone to get in the door because they don't have much of a track record. We think that we do a pretty good job of being able to discern that. If someone is coming out of another fund, they don't have their own track record, but they've done business someplace else, and our ability to peel back and see what their track record is attributable to other stops along their careers.
So essentially, the goal was what is going to be our implementation plan. So from an investment standpoint, we want to continue with our current program because essentially it has worked. We're able to have great outreach to invest with a number of emerging managers. We don't just see the smaller funds, but we also see the operating partners through our joint venture structure. Like I said, we hadn't done a fund of funds for quite a while, but given the changes in the industry, we think it's worthwhile to take another look, and we'll do that in the spring of this year. As Greg said, to the extent that we do a lot more joint ventures, we may have to have some additional staffing, and that will be a discussion with Chris and Michelle. And essentially, this is an ongoing strategy for us, period. This is the way we invest in real estate. So we actually get the bonus of seeing all these emerging managers on a regular basis. Local developers, operating partners are regular visitors to this building.
As far as going forward, how we will monitor and report, Townsend is going to add a section of their semi-annual reports.
Yeah, that's right. Townsend will work with staff on tracking not only the trends within the emerging manager universe, but also the performance of your actual holdings within your portfolio.
And in the other way that we already do it is through our diversity and management of investments report, which Solange and her team generate every February for you. And as far as outreach, we will continue to participate in industry forums. We do that across the investment staff and real estate as well. We are active participants in forums. We appear on panels, and we will continue doing that. We redouble our effort to encourage the efforts of our business partners, those that are account managers, to increase diversity within their teams, and to seek out other emerging managers that we can do business with. And lastly, we've been pretty successful. We're pretty proud of what we've done, and we want to encourage our peers as we go to real estate conferences to learn from our successes and kind of say the water's fine, jump in.
I would like to point out that Solange, who runs the funds of funds on the private equity side and is a regular participant in industry forums on the private equity side and some crossover to real estate, has been very helpful over time to show us ways to do outreach better. And so that's been a big part of the education and was real a real benefit from coming from the study. With that, we'll open it up to questions.
Cedric?
I just have a couple different things. One is, I feel like when we talk about emerging managers and diversity, it kind of gets a little muddled every time. And so I'm just wondering, moving forward, my understanding is when we talk about emerging managers, we're talking about managers that manage, is it less than $1 billion? Is that what we're talking about with an emerging manager? But then we kind of talk about diversity, and then it seems like that conversation gets kind of muddled to me in terms of precision about what we're talking about. I mean, I recognize some of those emerging managers are, women and minority business, in this case with real estate or, but I guess the other question I had was, or the other observation I had was, I remember going to Milken last, 2 years ago, Chris, when I went in LA, and it was really interesting to me that in real estate, it is all, like every single panel, Milken in general is a lot of, older white males who are great. But a lot of the real estate panels were like that. And I just was wondering, what have we learned from other asset classes, or are there things that, even today your panel, it's, there's three, white men presenting to us. And so I just was wondering kind of, what are we learning from our other branches that are doing this that we could sort of work on to help change that culture a little bit? Because it does seem like, it's striking to me, the visual of it, and versus just having programs but modeling. Because I know I work in a low income school in inner city LA, and it's like students need to see models of people on those Milken panels. They need to see a person of color or a woman up there for them to kind of go, oh, that's something to aspire to. Versus just kind of having programs. So I'm just wondering, what are we trying to do to, because I hear this, but I don't see, what are the practical, do we have examples of emerging managers we're working with, and maybe I'm wondering for another presentation, maybe we could hear from some of our emerging managers in real estate.
Greg, let me answer the first one while you guys put your thoughts together. Obviously, Arturo is a classic example.
Right, and I met Arturo, and
Yep.
he's to me, he's like a wonderful example of that. So.
Yeah, so I'll let me answer the first part for the new board members. If it seems muddled, the answer is yes, it is muddled. And that has a lot to do with
Not
state
just
law.
my perception.
Yeah,
Okay.
Prop 209, that's so old, I don't know why we even say it anymore. But the state definition got real muddled. We in PERS kind of met together and realized to comply with state law, we have to just say it's small. So we all, an emerging manager is a small manager. Now, what we realize is what you mean and what most of the legislative pressure means is ethnicity. And our big point, frankly, and we constantly hit this with the different ethnic groups, from my perspective, what matters to us really is gender. 70%, 72% of our population are women. So yes, the ethnicity of the state is changing, but if we have anything to stand on, it's gender. And so we bring that up constantly. So we as the staff understand that. We just have to, in publications and the things we do, talk about emerging.
Got it.
So Sharon,
That
it's
helps.
blurred.
Not my imagination. Okay.
It is not, it's totally there. So you always have to be careful. When we say emerging, we're talking about a small firm.
Okay.
But we make the point of trying to break out for you a minority or a women-owned business enterprise. One of the things that we and everybody in the industry struggles with is that also we see the Twigo Fellows as a good example. We're very active with them. They come out of Harvard. They're not ready to start their own firm out of college, out of an MBA program. So they want to go work for let's just say a big public company that's dominated by white males. But they want to grow in that and then branch out. So how do we foster that as well? So we're trying to pick up the ethnicity and encourage ethnicity of our money managers, and then also do business with small firms and try to break out for you. This is how much we do with small firms, but this is how much of those small firms are minority and women-owned business enterprises. I'm pleased to say we have an interesting problem in global equity where and fixed income specifically, where some of those minority and women-owned business enterprises are getting pretty big. And they're much bigger than $1 billion. Well, does that mean we fire them? What do we do? Do we not get to count them anymore? we helped them grow, and now they're an established firm.
Right.
But they're a women or a minority-owned business enterprise. So we're struggling on both ends of the definition. So you guys answer the question about in real estate.
I'll let Greg give a specific example, but notwithstanding the white males in front of you, we actually have a great track record and are known in the industry, and I think Townsend can independently talk about this, of how our outreach has worked. And the number of diverse managers and emerging managers, we have more than anybody, I'm certain of that. The number of diverse managers, I think our process and our structuring and the way we do investments will allow us to outperform others. And by the way, Michaelin, which would have added some diversity to this panel, had a personal conflict. That's what she wasn't here today. With respect to specific strategies, the last manager we added was a manager of diversity to the one you pointed out, and I'll let Greg give the history of that manager.
Prime Store is a Hispanic developer in Southern California, retail property type. And we'd been tracking them for about 2 years before we put the transaction together. Real estate transactions can take a long time to come together. And they had a relationship with another institutional investor. They had about 7 assets that we acquired from the other institutional investor. So we bought into an existing core portfolio, which is another theme that we want to do, is add core to the real estate portfolio. We also have a couple development assets in that. It was about a $250 million commitment. About 115 of that went to the existing portfolio, leaving the balance as dry powder to seek out new investments and new developments. Pointed out, Prime Store is a best-in-class retail developer, period. They happen to be Hispanic, but they are a best-in-class manager. Our goal and what we've been trying to do is to seek out more managers like that, and we will continue to. To your point, I go to a lot of emerging manager conferences, and as I said earlier in my comments, the emerging manager conferences aren't particularly diverse. And so it becomes a financial services industry challenge to encourage more women and minority participation in our industry. And that's what we talked about when we're doing our outreach, is encouraging our business partners when they're making hires to seek to increase the diversity in their companies. And then telling folks, we've had success in this, it works. But the talent pool has to grow. There has to be more women and minorities entering our industry. And that's not just real estate, that's the financial services industry.
Just to highlight, though, I just think it's important. You said the portfolio was Southern California. The portfolio is my neighborhood. It's Pacoima. It's the hood of the San Fernando Valley. So that's why it's good stuff. There's a Tommy Burgers near every one of those, just so that you can all remember. Jack likes Tommy's. He remembers that.
I do.
And I will point out one back to our structuring. We don't get that partner if we don't have a joint venture structure, because he did not want to do a fund of funds. He just wants to operate real estate. So our ability to do joint venture structures allowed us to get that partner.
How much are we of his capital?
Well, of the capital he has in Southern California, we're 100% of it. He has another joint venture with the previous partner in Chicago, and he just recently got capital from Artemis,
which is a
fund of funds.
Fund of funds.
To do specific investments. So we have a lot of pride with that one of our joint venture partners is now investing for a fund of funds.
And they're investing, their mandate for that fund of funds is pure core, which doesn't coincide with what our venture is with Prime Store.
Any other questions, comments? Thank you. Which brings us to item 17, which is a review of information requests. I believe there was one information request, and that was to bring back the policy on infrastructure to look at whether or not we want to continue to look at each infrastructure investment as they come before us. So that would be in February?
Yeah, I would say we could try and do it in December, but I think we'll have to shoot for February for that. And on your December agenda, we do need to add 2 reports that are due to the legislature in early in the new year, so we need to get them to you. The first is what we call the ESG report. It is mostly the geopolitical risk report that we have on Sudan, Iran, those kinds of things. And then the other is we like to do the green report. It'll coincide with quite a few of the other things. So those will both, we can put them as information items, but you can just receive those. You don't have to necessarily have a hearing. And just so you know, we do have 4 finalists for the general consultant selection. We'll detail in the memo for you. We only had 4 applicants, I am sorry to say, and we really did go out of our way to ask people to apply. The procurement staff got responses back on why some of these firms didn't respond, and we'll include those in our memo to you that you'll get. We'll also be sending you a comparison sheet of the 4 firms of kind of their people and their strengths and weaknesses, and then also their fees. And so we split the general consultant services into 2 groups. You can hire 1 firm, you can hire 2 firms. We designed the RFP with procurement so that you have total flexibility to do whatever you want to do. But the interviews do take pretty darn close to an hour when you think about their presentation, but mostly we allot time for your Q&A. And we will have suggestive questions, but you're open to ask them anything. And this is your consultant, so staff wants to sit back and really let you get to know these people. This is your decision.
Thanks, Chris. Anything else on the agenda? Yeah, go ahead, Tom.
Did anybody not apply, Chris, that we really wanted to?
I was hopeful, let me just say, there were a couple firms I would hope that would to enrich your selection process.
Right.
But what's nice is that 3 of the 4 firms that applied that made it, they were in your finals before, including a couple that were runners-up. So you did this in 2000, let me get this right, you did this in 2005, you did it again, 2004-05, you did it again in 2009, and then you only awarded a 3-year contract, so we're back in 12. But so the quality we're bringing to you, staff vetted them. We could have eliminated 1, but we felt all 4 were worthy, and there's no, I guess to answer your question succinctly, no. I would have liked to see more selection, but we're very happy with what you have coming before you.
Anything else? Okay, which brings us to our last is opportunity for statements from the public. Hi, Loretta.
Hi, Harry. Glad to see you.
Nice to see you.
Loretta Toggenberger, United Teacher, Los Angeles, retired. And we have retiree email lists that go out. And our retiree man that does that loves reading all the things from West Sacramento, which included this past week the honor that our chief financial officer became number 3 out of the whole world as a chief financial officer investment. And we really want to thank him, and he is going to be our speaker in January. But everybody emailed back and forth, oh, good for Chris Ailman. So we want to give congrats to Chris.
Absolutely.
Thank you, Loretta. Okay, we are adjourned.
Woo-hoo.